So now what we're going to do is disconnect each of the bullet connectors, and you now notice that we have the motor wires disconnected. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some string and we're going to tie it around these wires in this connector here, in this wiring insulation, and we're going to gently pull the string through, and then we leave the string intact. Then when we go to fish the wires back through, we can do that. So what we're going to do though is notice there's some wire ties here. We want to clip the wire ties. You can pick up some new wire ties at your local hardware store. That way you can now move the harness out of the way, and you can now be able to pull this wire up through the frame. But before we do that, we're going to put our string around here. As you can see, we now have some string tied around the wire bundle here, and I've doubled up this string because I don't want it to break, but it's very thin string. So what we're going to do is gently feed the wire up into the frame, and what you're probably going to have to do is push the individual wires in one at a time into the frame. And as you see, let me raise the camera. Notice the wires are out. The string has been routed through the frame. Now we can untie the string from the wire harness here. Now we have the wires disconnected, but notice we have the string still through the frame. So go around and make sure you loosen all of your bolts, and make sure that Allen head socket is in the bolt properly, because if it isn't, you'll strip the head out and you'll have a heck of a time getting that bolt out. So jiggle it, make sure it's in. Then once you're completely loose on all the bolts, take the Allen socket off, use it like a screwdriver, and now you can remove all your bolts. Now, before you pull the rotor, look for the little black arrow, because if you're going to put this back on, by the way, this is a 160 millimeter rotor with 6 bolts. So if you're going to replace this, make sure you get the proper size, and then when you put that rotor back on, take a picture with your cell phone which way that arrow is pointing, because when you put that on, you want to put that arrow back in the right position. Put your bolts in your cover, and now you can remove the rotor from the wheel assembly. At this point, because the wires are disconnected, if you have to do any maintenance on replacing a tube, replacing a tire, it's now very easy to pull the wheel from the bike and work on the wheel. The Jetson manual says just to pull the wheel and change your tube and your tire. Well, it's sitting right here while the wire's connected to the controller, but you can't pull the brake rotor off because the wire's connected. The only way to get the brake rotor off is to disconnect the wires like we did. So let's go ahead and reverse this assembly, show you how to connect everything back up, assuming that we've done some maintenance, either the tube, the tire, the calipers, or the disc rotor. Then we'll put everything back, show you how to reroute those wires, get you back on the road. When you're done with your maintenance, or in the case of needing to change your rotor, now that the wires are disconnected, you can feed the wires through the rotor. Make sure you orient the arrow on the rotor the way it was when you took it off. Get yourself some Loctite. The cheapest Loctite you can get is at Harbor Freight Tools. They sell it very inexpensively. This is thread lock number 42. Whatever you do not want to get the one that you have to heat with the torch to loosen. You just want the regular Loctite. So we're going to line up the holes. Then we're going to get our screws. And on each screw, you want to put a drop of Loctite. And then you want to start each screw with Loctite on it. And then just repeat that for each of the screws or the bolts on the rotor. I'll do the rest off camera, then we'll torque these up. After you get all the screws started, take your Allen socket and tighten snug all of the bolts. Once all the bolts are snug, you can mount the socket on your ratchet. And what you want to do is you want to snug each one. And again, you want to make sure that Allen head socket is properly seated in the bolt before you tighten it. Otherwise, you will strip out the bolt head. You want to make sure these bolts are snug, but you don't want to over tighten them or you run the risk of snapping the bolt, and we don't want to do that. You want to make sure there's a washer on each axle, because that washer is going to be mounted to the inside of the frame on both sides. But now that we have our maintenance done, we have our rotor mounted. We're not going to do anything else to the rear wheel at this point. We can now take and reroute our wires through the frame and reconnect the wires from the motor directly to the controller. So let's go ahead and move the camera. I'll show you how we're going to do that. I was having trouble with the string, so go over and get yourself some stainless steel lock wire, or commonly referred to as safety wire. You can pick this up at Harbor Freight Tools. Cut yourself about a foot or so length. Put a bit of a curve in it, and then let me show you how we're going to feed this into the tube. We're going to take the curve and we're going to feed it into the hole. And have it go down inside the tube. And then get yourself a pair of tweezers. And what you can do is fish this through to where the wire is just coming near the edge of the hole. And then if you look right here, you can take your tweezers and as you can see, I can now pull the wire out of the hole. The wire is a bit stiffer than the string and will let me get a little bit better grasp on that. So, and it's also much easier to feed through this tube from the top here where the cable's going to come in and out inside the battery box. So now what we're going to do, we'll come down and you see we have the end of the wire here. Now what we can do is we can make a loop around the wire harness here. Like so. And now we can feed all the wires through individually. I like to start with the bullet connectors. They're easy to get in. And then you'll have your small connector. And then you can get your multi-wire connector in there. And make sure you get all of those little connectors down inside the hole. You'll have to fiddle and jiggle with it, but eventually you'll be able to get that in. Make sure you bend that safety wire so it's sticking down so it's not going to get in the way of the wire harness. Okay, once you get all the wires in, and that big connector right there, you're going to have to put that in last because it takes up a lot of space. Now, once you get the wire, all the wires into the tube, what you can do now, very gently feed the wires, and as you can see now, I can start seeing the wires come out from the bottom hole. So get your tweezers you may have to back up the wire harness just a little bit so you can get the end and notice we got one bullet connector coming out. Now again, you have to do this probably one wire at a time. There's the green wire, so now we have two bullet connectors coming out. And notice there's the big connector. And all we have now is, looks like, one more wire. Let's feed a little bit more down. Notice there's the sheathed wire, so the only connector we have left to get out is the yellow bullet connector. So now I'm going to very gently okay, one thing you're going to have to do is you're also going to have to jiggle the brake cable. What I found out was that the yellow wire wrapped itself around the brake cable. So by jiggling and loosening, feeding up the brake cable in further, I'm then able to pull out all of the wires. So we can now fish that through. I can turn the wheel back around and I can feed the brake cable back toward the rear. Now let's go ahead. So take the little white wire and the white wire connector. Now there's a single pin inside here, and this connector only goes together one way, so don't force it. You want to keep on turning that connector until it snaps together. Don't force it. Again, there's only one pin and there's only one way to take and connect these two. So you want to connect the white wire, and then we want to get the large 4-pin connector. And there's a push at the bottom and there's the metal pins, so you want to make sure, and again there's a little notch on here, so you want to make sure the connector will only go one way. So you want to make sure those connectors and that little notch line up, and then you can snap those together. Now all we have is the bullet connectors. So now we can connect the bullet connectors properly. So we want to go green to green and make sure you push them in until they snap. Then you want to go blue to blue. And you want to go yellow to yellow. And there are your 5 wires. And the red wire here, the red and black wire, is for your charging point on your cover. So don't keep track on that. So what we want to do now is we want to organize this wire harness so that it goes up inside the battery compartment. And you want to make sure all those wires are nicely organized, because when you put the cover back on, you don't want any of those wires to be pinching. But for the time being, we're going to leave the cover off because we're going to make sure we're going to hitch up the rear wheel now. The last thing we'll do is put on the battery cover. So let's go ahead and reposition the camera. I'll show you how we're going to mount the wheel.